What do you call an omnipotent being who loves to cause trouble and is obsessed with Captain Picard? Well, he calls himself Q. In this live stream, we will count down the top 10 best Q episodes in the Star Trek universe. So cue the mariachi band and let's start the show. Hello and welcome to the Savage Stream, the weekly live stream where we talk all things Star Trek. And today we are talking about the enigmatic and all-powerful Q. We're going to be running down his 10 most pivotal episodes in chronological order, not in order of worst to best. The timestamps are below. So if you want to jump ahead to the next episode, you can do so at any time. Let's get started with the first pivotal Q episode on the list. Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2, Encounter at Farpoint. The Enterprise investigates the mysterious Farpoint station while also standing trial by the enigmatic Q, who accuses humanity of being a dangerous and barbaric species. The crew discovers that Farpoint is actually an alien being held captive and exploited for its abilities by the inhabitants of the planet. The crew frees the space jelly, resolving the immediate crisis and earning a tentative reprieve from Q's judgment. So this episode has to come first on the list because this is our first encounter with Q, and it's so important. But I do want to start off by saying this is not a great episode. This is not my favorite Q episode. There are a few Q episodes that I like less than this. Equally as bad as this, I think. However, you got to start at the beginning. And I'm honestly surprised that this show ever got picked up after seeing this pilot. Like, I don't know how that happened, but I'm so glad it did. Because without this pilot being picked up, we wouldn't have 7 years of TNG, which got better and better, might I add. And we wouldn't have all of these amazing spinoffs, both the kind of old school spinoffs like Voyager and Deep Space Nine and Enterprise, but also these new school spinoffs like Lower Decks and Prodigy and Strange New Worlds, Discovery, Picard. So I'm really glad that the networks took a chance, and I'm really grateful to all the TOS super fans who pushed this show, who like faithfully watched it so that way it wouldn't get canceled. But honestly, rewatching this episode, it's a mystery. It has to just be the fandom and the love for Trek and the fact that they hadn't had any in like 30 years that kept this show going. That being said, this is our first introduction to this character who was originally going to be just a one-off character, just to kind of show the zany things that can happen in Starfleet, I guess. But because the experience was so palpable and so memorable, they kept bringing Q back again and again and again, which I love that. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. In this episode, we meet Q, who's this kind of omniscient, omnipotent being who's kind of mean. He puts all of humanity on trial because he just doesn't like humans. And he wants Picard to prove that the human race deserves to continue to exist, which seems a little unfair because I feel like Q didn't do that with any of the other species. He just like let them live or he snuffed them out depending on his mood. But here there's this whole like song and dance about do they deserve to live? At the end, when the Enterprise crew frees the space jelly and it goes off to live its best life with its mating space jelly, Q is like, all right, you guys kind of have a little bit of something there. I'm not going to destroy you right now. So, yay. However, as we're going to see, Q keeps coming back to taunt the crew of the Enterprise and to taunt humanity, and really mostly Picard. I mean, he's got snipey things to say about all of the crew members. Besides Janeway, because he has a crush on Janeway, but he's got like snipey things to say about Riker and about everybody else, about Worf and Tasha Yar and Beverly, and even in Voyager about Chakotay. But what I love about this character is that it's kind of the swings in personality that we see. In this episode, he's just mean. Like, he's just mean, he's cruel, he's all powerful. This is just kind of a game to him. But in some of the episodes, he's really playful and silly. In some of the episodes, he's kind of, I want to say gracious, but can we say that word with Q? I don't know if that word really fits, but in some episodes he's giving Picard a second chance, right? He's doing something magnanimous. So we get to see this character sort of reinvent himself every time he comes on screen, which I think is pretty fun and pretty unique because most characters, we don't really get to see that. If you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to subscribe so you can keep track of all the updated videos that are going to be coming out. Be sure to like this video if you're enjoying it so far. I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to go to the next Q episode on the list. I feel like I've said everything I need to say about encounter at Farpoint, which was just like, the episode was wild. When Grace says, "It's a real Q done it," which I love. I kind of want that to be another t-shirt, like the Sherlock Holmes theme, but it says Q done it. And then like Q is Holmes. I think that would be kind of fun. PS2 Chipper says, "How was your birthday?" It was very interesting. And I am super excited to be home. Like it was a pretty long trip, and I'm glad to be home. And I'm glad to be with you guys talking about Star Trek, which is one of my favorite things to do. When Grace says, it's a meet cute. Get it? Cute. And yeah, happy belated birthday. Thank you so much. Okay, let's go to the next episode on the list. Season 2, Episode 16, Q Who. Q hurls the Enterprise into the path of the Borg to prove to Picard that humanity is not ready for the dangers of deep space exploration. Against Guinan's constant warnings to leave this system immediately, an away team discovers that the Borg are unlike anything they've ever faced. Eventually, Q comes to the rescue and returns the crew home, but they're left with the knowledge that the Borg are now coming for them. Okay, so this is actually a good episode. We've skipped a few Q episodes between Encounter at Farpoint and this one for a good reason, because those were not great. But this is a good episode. We learned a couple different things in this episode. One, we learned that there's some kind of beef between Q and Guinan that we never find out what exactly it is, but they do not like each other. And Q is kind of afraid of Guinan and even calls her in a different episode, calls her this, he calls her an imp and also a dangerous creature. So it's like Q is afraid of Guinan, and we're not totally sure why, but the two of them have this history. In this episode, basically, Picard is out exploring, right? Like doing his thing, doing his Starfleet thing. They're just like seeing what there is to see. And Q comes to Picard and is like, "You should not be exploring so far away from your home base. You need to stay really close to Earth because there's dangerous things out there." And Picard's like, "Psh, we live for danger." You know what I mean? Like, my middle name is Danger. Picard is just saying, we love exploring. That's what we're going to do. And we think that we can handle anything that comes our way. So then Q says, "Oh, really?" And sends them to the Borg, just to prove a point, which then makes the Borg go, "Ooh, more people to assimilate." And so it's what I love. One of the scenes I love in this episode, it's a pretty serious episode. It's really interesting to see their first iteration of the Borg, the first kind of thinking of the costumers and the makeup artists and everybody about what could the Borg potentially look like. And I love what they came up with. It's amazing. But inside of that, as they're still trying to figure out like what is this species like? How do they function? How do they interact and stuff like that? At the same time, there's this part where we have a conversation between Guinan and Q, and Q is like, they're going too far. The humans are going too far. They need to stay in their lane. And Guinan is like, that's their decision to make. Let them explore. Like, let them figure out on their own. And I really like this because, it elevates Guinan to this peer with Q, where the two of them are on the same level. And the two of them are talking like, we are definitely not humans. We're far, far, far more evolved than humans. And we can see them from this great distance. And while Q is kind of like playing with Picard and the Enterprise crew, like a cat might play with a mouse, Guinan is like integrating with the Enterprise crew. She's kind of like, ooh, she's exploring like, what is this young like species like, She's more of like an explorer inside of Explorer. She's a little bit Inception there. But I love that. I love that the whole idea of that. And that never gets fully fleshed out, like the interplay between those two beings, between the El-Lorians and the Q continuum. However, I'm okay with that. I actually like the mystery because I feel like if they had explained everything away, it would have been something extremely unsatisfactory. It would have been something where you're like, oh, that's the reason? That's dumb. You know what I mean? So sometimes it's better to have mystery. It kind of reminds me of that movie Jaws. You know how in the movie Jaws, you don't see Jaws almost ever? You just see like the fin come up and then you see people get attacked and you see blood in the water and people freaking out. And that makes it so scary. Well, the reason that happened was because the shark kept like the created shark kept manufacturing and kept failing. And so every scene where the shark was supposed to be in it, the shark was broken. So they had to do something different. However, the mystery is what made it so palpable and so like scary and so terrifying and really brought across the vibe they were going for. I feel like that with Q and Guinan. I feel like, yeah, more mystery. Like, yeah, keep it. Don't ever tell us what that is. So that way we can just be like, man, like what has happened between the two of them? And then we can speculate. It's like a good mystery. Yes, Bruce the shark. So, okay. Is there anything else I want to say about Q Who? Nope. I do want to say for those of you who are watching live and who have been to a few Savage streams, the first couple of episodes on the list, I feel like I talk about all the time because they come up in some of my favorite episodes or best Picard episodes or best romantic episodes or whatever. But the second half of the list is like new territory. So that's just food for thought. I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to go to the next episode on the list. Best of Trek, worst of Trek says, happy belated birthday. So many birthdays. Thank you so much. Crazy Normie, you too, says, Q Who is crazy. I love it. Right? It's kind of wild. So when we reviewed Q Who on the TNG podcast, I was like, Q is such a jerk. Why did he do that? Why did he throw them in the path of the Borg? Like just to prove a point, just to prove to Picard that you're not as big and bad as you think you are. And then now that Q does hurl them back to the Alpha Quadrant and hurl them back to like close to Earth. However, Guinan tells Picard at the end of the episode, now the Borg are aware of you. So now they'll be coming. Like now they're coming for us, you know, like, and I just felt like, man, if we weren't supposed, and Q, I think Guinan also said something like they've encountered the Borg like years earlier than they were supposed to because somehow she knows this. So again, it's like Q is such a jerk. Like, why did you do that? But my co-host Andrea had a different point of view. She said actually she felt like Q was in the right because Picard was being cocky or overconfident and did need to have some humility to know that he does not know everything that's out there in space. And he's not necessarily equipped just because they are capable of going to space does not mean he's equipped to face everything in space all alone. So let me know what you think in the comments. Was Q right to hurl the Enterprise D into the path of the Borg to teach Picard/humanity a lesson? Or was Q wrong to do that? Let me know what you think. No wrong answers here. PS2 Chipper says, the beef is best left a mystery. It is up to the audience to concoct their own backstory. Totally true. And I really, I haven't actually heard too many other people say what they think the backstory is. I just have my own thoughts, but I think that's fun. I think that's fun in the fandom and in the lore, just for people to be like, oh, it's this. Oh, it's this. Somebody probably tried to explain it in some of these fanfic books or short stories or something like that, that I wouldn't know because I have not dove into all of that stuff. However, I agree with you. Like, I think it's best left a mystery. Hello, Nadia. Good to see you. Don't forget the hot chocolate scene. What's the hot chocolate scene, Grace? What am I forgetting? PS2 Chipper says that Q might makes right. Like Q could do whatever Q wants to do. I guess that's true. Okay, with that said, let's go to the next episode on the list. Season 3, Episode 13, Deja Q. Q is stripped of his powers and seeks asylum aboard the Enterprise. Guinan tests whether or not Q is mortal by stabbing him with a fork. Turns out, he was telling the truth. His numerous enemies immediately attack the ship, and it's not until he attempts self-sacrifice that his Q powers are returned to him. So, this episode, I love. This is probably my favorite Q episode on TNG. Followed by Qpid, because Qpid's really fun. But this one's more like, I would have to say this one over Qpid because this one is on the Enterprise with the Enterprise crew. It's not in some like fantasy land. It's not a holodeck episode. It's actually on the Enterprise. This is such a pivotal time in Q's like storyline because this whole time he's like, humanity is such a savage race. They don't deserve to live, blah, blah, blah. And then when he's being kicked out of the continuum and he's given the choice to become anything he wants, he picks humanity. And I think he even told Picard something like it was between this and like a slug or an amoeba or something he said. And he was like, oh, it was such a hard choice, but I picked humanity. I just feel like thou protest too much, Q. He's clearly got this fixation on humanity. And it's almost like he's making humanity a frenemy, like he talks so much trash about it, but also wants nothing more than to be human is what I feel like is coming from Q. Like he's given that I want to be you energy of This episode is great. It is my favorite TNG Q episode because we get to see what is life like with Q actually experiencing things without his powers. And it's hilarious because he's hungry, he's thirsty, he's tired, all these things he's never experienced before. And he's like, what is the sound in my stomach? Why do I feel so faint? All these things that he's experiencing. It's kind of like a more exaggerated version of Data, how Data kind of tries to explore humanity. And there's some actually good, sweet moments between Data and Q where they're both talking about the struggle to be human. And Data makes some kind of comment where he's like, I think it's interesting. I forget how he says it, but he says like, Q, you picked becoming human as a punishment, and I want nothing more than to be human. And Q's like, why? And I agree with Q. Why, Data? Why? Like, Data, you're better than humans in so many ways, except for emotions, which are important for humans because we need emotions to regulate our behavior, to form connections with society. Like, it's an evolutionary advantage for us to have emotions. However, aside from that, you've got everything else. And turns out, hey, your dad made you an emotions chip. So you got that too. So like, really, I don't get the fascination on either side from Data or from Q. I don't get the fascination with humanity, but it's a story about humans. And so I guess it's supposed to center us to make us feel like the bestest thing in the whole galaxy. But I love seeing Q take this journey. And of course he requests asylum from Picard because that's like his only frenemy in the world, in anywhere. And Picard's like, fine. And then immediately Q gets attacked by some of his enemies, just one species that has been like waiting for the chance to get some payback. But you got to believe there's more and more and more and more. He's just got a wake behind him of destruction because he just likes to mess with people and things and creatures for fun. At the end of the episode, when he gets his Q powers back, he takes those aliens. They're kind of like they're like little sparks. They're like little bits of electricity. He takes those aliens and he puts them in the palm of his hand, and he's like going to do something bad to them, like torture them or something like that. And the Q who gave him his powers back, like shows back up and is just like, we're still watching you, Q. And he's like, oh, right, of course, I wasn't going to do anything. And he kind of lets them go. But it's like this, he redeemed himself. That's how he got his powers back. But the second he got his powers back, he went back to his old ways. Like there was no learning. There was no growth. He just went back to who he was, which I kind of like that for him. I like that he presents a different face in each episode, but he also is still he's still Q. You know what I mean? Like he's still mischievous. He's still super powerful. One of the people on my email list responded to this email about, let's come have this conversation. And he has so many fun ideas of alternate things that could happen on the show. And one of his ideas was about this episode about Q. And he said something like, what if Q had to stay human? I think he said something like, what if Q had to stay human? He could keep his powers, but he would have to be mortal. Like, so he could have all the powers he wanted, but he would still die at whatever age. Or he could go back to the Q continuum, but like be human or something like that. Some crisscross. I need to look at the email now to see what he said. But I thought it was interesting, this thought of what if Q never returned to the continuum? What if he stayed on the Enterprise? And so I kind of responded. I was like, what if he stayed and he stayed human? What if they never gave him back his powers? First of all, he wouldn't last past the weekend because he has so many enemies. They would all just destroy him. One of them would have a lucky shot. At least one of them would have a lucky shot. But let's pretend like he didn't have a whole bunch of enemies that are now bearing down on the Enterprise D to get some revenge. Let's pretend like that wasn't a thing. And he was just like a regular human who didn't have a lot of people coming to get him. How interesting would that be if Q was human? Like, what would he do? How would he be on this ship? Would they even keep him on the ship? Would they drop him off at the nearest space station? Would they take him back to the Daystrom Institute for study? Or like, what would happen? I just thought that was a really interesting idea. Now, of course, he has to be returned to his Q status because this is an episodic show, not a serial. So at the end of the episode, you got to hit the big reset button and start everything over. But I thought that was an interesting thought experiment. What would the ship be like if Q stayed human? And if Q was always on the ship? I mean, I would transfer, no joke. Like I would be like, I'm done with this ship. I don't think I could handle that particular coworker. But an interesting thought. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to go to the next episode on the list. Yes. Okay. So when Grace said, don't forget the hot chocolate scene. And I was thinking hot chocolate between like Guinan and Q. And I was like, I don't remember them having a drink together. I remember having a conversation together, but not a drink. And then when Grace clarified, Sonia Gomez spills hot chocolate on Picard, which I totally forgot happened in this episode. Yep, totally classic. That was a classic moment in Trek. PS2 Chipper says, I remember busting up laughing to the mariachi band. It was so out of place in the 24th century. Yeah, that was fun. And he gave Picard and Riker cigars, like on TV when people would have a baby and somebody would always be in like the delivery room giving the dad cigars, or the dad would be passing out cigars, which is like, don't smoke cigars around newborn babies, but just such a funny thing. And then he turns to Data, and Data's like, don't you do it. Don't make me human. I know that you want to do that for me because we had all these one-on-one heart-to-heart conversations about how I really want to be human, but I want to get there my own way. Again, why? If Data's whole goal was to be human and Q's giving him a shortcut, why not take it? Now, I get that Data is on a journey of self-discovery. Like, I understand that, and this is part of his journey. However, humans also go on journeys of self-discovery. So if Q made him human, he could now continue that experience of like learning who he is and learning about emotions and all these things. He would just do it from a human body. And his human body could even look just like his android body, except for instead of a positronic net, he would have a regular brain and stuff like that. And maybe he'd get to keep his computational power. Maybe he'd get to keep his his skin coloring and his eye coloring. I don't know. Like, that's another good thought experiment. What would Data be like if he was human? If Q had turned him into a human, what would he look like? Because he couldn't look like Brent Spiner. That's boring. He has to look, he has to still be Data. But which parts of Data could he keep and which parts could he not keep? Like, would he maybe not have the super strength anymore because now he's a weak human? But would he maybe still have the intelligence or the quick acts? Would he have a photographic memory? Like, that'd be super interesting. Anyways, Q turns to him and Data's like, don't you do it. Don't make me human. And Q is like, I would never do something so terrible to another person by consigning them to a life of humanity or whatever. But he does give him one big belly laugh because that's something that they talked about where Data was like, I will never know love. I will never know death. I will never know what it's like to have a deep belly laugh. And so Q leaves him with a deep belly laugh. And so after the mariachi band and the cigars and stuff, and he goes away or whatever, Data's sitting there and then he looks like he's about to throw up or something, but he just starts like laughing. And then it's like this hysterical laughter and everybody starts smiling. And then he's like, and he goes back to being himself. And he's like, oh, and I just love that. That's like such a perfect ending. Yeah. Oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, Andrea is in the house. I was just talking about you, Andrea. And we were talking about, before this episode, Deja Q, we were talking about Q Who and how I was like, Q was such a jerk for just sending them in the path of the Borg, and how you were like, well, Picard needed to learn his lesson. So I was just talking about you. When Grace says he would be a human being. You got a million of them, huh, When Grace? Every time you make a joke, I just want to push my invisible glasses up my nose and be like, well played, well played. Andrea says, Charisse, you would 100% transfer. I would 100% transfer if I had to work with Q. Would you work with Q? Let me know in the comments below. If Q was your new coworker, would you stay at that job? My answer is no, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. While you're typing that, I'm going to play the next episode on the list. Season 4, Episode 20, Qpid. Q transports Picard and the crew into a Robin Hood-inspired fantasy as punishment for Picard's denial of romantic feelings towards Vosh. Cast as Robin Hood, Picard must rescue Vosh from an arranged marriage to Sir Random Guy. The reward for Picard and crew saving the day is that Vosh decides to join Q and explore the multiverse. This episode is so fun. Like, I feel like I talk about this every week. This episode is so fun. So this is another example of kind of the undulating faces of Q, because we got in Q Who this very serious Q who's like, I'm going to send you to the Borg to teach you a lesson. And then in Deja Q, we get this more playful side of Q where he's like, I'm human. Oh, that's the worst. But you just get to see like lots of comedy, lots of jokes. And then in this one, we get this fantasy land of Sherwood Forest, which is just fun. It's like the costume's great. The sets are great. This is such a fun episode. But Q himself in this episode is actually quite menacing. Like, if you haven't seen this episode recently, I highly recommend it. It's a bundle of laughs. But Q himself is not fun at all in this episode. He's not fun. He's not playful. He's not like precocious at all. He is very serious. He's very straight-laced and he's very menacing. Every scene with Q in it, he's like not smiling. He's serious and he just is out to hurt Picard. And this one was also like a teach him a lesson kind of a thing because Vosh came on board the Enterprise. I think this is how it started. Correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but Vosh comes aboard on the Enterprise to meet with Picard or something like that. And then Q is like, ooh, is this your girlfriend? And Picard's like, no, she's not my girlfriend. She's just some girl I know, okay? And Q's like, let's see. And then creates this whole scenario to make Picard like confess that he actually likes Vosh romantically, which is that part trying to make him confess is more of like the Q we know of just being ridiculous. And then of course creating Sherwood Force is the Q we know being ridiculous. But his personality in this episode is very serious and menacing and terrifying. At the end though, we get more of the Q that we know and love. Picard and Vosh are sitting in Picard's quarters. Everyone's A-okay. Everyone's been returned to the Enterprise. The fight's over. They've saved the day. And so Picard's sitting and chit-chatting with Vosh. And then Q shows up and is like, oh yeah, we've already decided, because at some point Q like vanishes with Vosh and then Picard's sent back on his own. Anyways, now we come to find out that Q has given Vosh an offer she cannot refuse, which is an offer to like explore the galaxy and the times and all this stuff. He actually gave this offer to Picard as well. Like he had asked Picard, do you want to see all these things? And Picard was like, no, leave me alone. You know, but Vosh was like, I'm in, I'm totally in. So they go off to do their own thing. And Picard's just like, okay. And I kind of felt like, I don't know, part of me felt, as a viewer, loved it. But putting myself in Picard's shoes, part of me is just like, well, what was the point of that then? What was the point of this entire thing? You just wanted me to confess that I have feelings for Vosh just so you could whisk her away to like the far reaches of the galaxy and I'll never see her again? What was it? Like, that just seems kind of mean. Well, on that note, I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to hit the next episode on the list. So Andrea says, I would transfer departments, LOL. See, I'm still concerned of just like seeing Q on the, I don't know. I just feel like his shenanigans would be like ship wide. But you're right. If we worked in the same department, that would be an instant transfer. And if he had any kind of authority in any way, shape, or form, which I don't see how he could on the Enterprise, because he's like not an officer and he doesn't have any, you know, Enterprise skills, although he has Q skills. Anyways, if he was given any kind of authority and he had to be like my boss or something, yeah, I'm out. I'm 100% out. PS2 Chipper says, Q is better than your best friend. He is with you to the bitter end, whether you like it or not. Crazy Normie YT says, I would work with Q until I couldn't take it anymore and then quit. I like how you have a plan, like you have a strategy of like your whole thought process that I would keep going until I just couldn't, and then I would quit. See, me just knowing, just having seen him freaking out in 10 Forward, seeing Guinan stab him, that would kind of be enough for me. When he got transferred to my department, I'd be like, check, please. Like, I don't even think we need to explore this. When Grace says, I feel like if you worked with Q and you tried to complain to HR, it would just be Q in a wig when you got to the office. That's pretty funny. Oh, man. Okay, let's hit the next episode on the list. Season 6, Episode 15, Tapestry. After Picard is mortally wounded, Q gives him the opportunity to relive and change a pivotal decision in his youth. This change turns him into a timid and uninspired officer in the present. Realizing the importance of his choices and learning from his mistakes, Picard embraces his original path, regaining his life and rank. So this episode is also not my favorite. It is not one of the top Q episodes in my enjoyment. However, the reason why it made this list is because this is a time when we see Q being magnanimous, which again is like a different face of Q. In this episode, he gives Picard a chance to redo a decision from his youth. So the episode starts with Picard needing emergency surgery because his artificial heart, which they show and which looks extremely artificial, has malfunctioned. So he needs a heart transplant from his fake heart to a new fake heart, which really, yes, we need that because that artificial heart looked ridiculous. So when he's in like the afterlife or the Matrix White Room or whatever, Q is all like, hey, the whole reason you're in this mess is because you got in that knife fight when you were 21, a fresh cadet right out of the academy. If you hadn't gotten in that knife fight, you would have never gotten a knife through your heart. You would have had your original heart. So then you would have never had a heart that failed. So then you wouldn't have died. So he kind of gives him another chance. He's like, you can go back and change that decision and you wouldn't be dead right now. Now I say that Q is being magnanimous because he does give Picard a chance to change his past. However, in true Q fashion, he's really doing more harm than good, which I feel like should be on Q's like family crest, doing more harm than good. That's like his tagline. So Picard goes back and changes his decision and doesn't get stabbed in the chest. But then when they go forward, it's kind of like It's a Wonderful Life, except for he's still there in the life. When they go forward, he's not captain. He's just like I think he's maybe even an ensign. And he cannot go forward in his career because he's become the type of person who's timid, who doesn't take chances, who doesn't take risks, who doesn't stand up to bullies, who doesn't pick fights. He's changed his whole personality from that one decision. So now he lives this life that's just quiet obscurity. And he was the captain of the freaking flagship. So even in his obscurity, he still managed to land on the flagship, but he's not running the flagship. And that's when he's like, no, Q, like, take me back to my original plan. Take me back. I want to make the same decisions. And Q is like, if you do, though, you're going to die. You're going to end up dead on that table with Beverly Crusher hovering over you. And Picard's like, so be it. I'd rather be dead than whatever that was, that whole life that I was living that wasn't really me, which is actually a really powerful thing to know about yourself. That like the person I've become, I value it so much. I wouldn't change a thing. That's a powerful thing to say to yourself. Anyways, so he goes back, gets in the fight, gets stabbed in the chest, and then he wakes up on the operating room. And Beverly's like, you were dead for whatever, 30 seconds, whatever it was. You actually did die. So Q was right. What Q didn't say was you weren't going to stay dead. You were going to be revived like immediately as soon as we put the new heart in. So that's why I'm like, he's magnanimous, but also he's being very tricky. He's only causing more drama. And then we're not going to talk about the episode itself because it was super cringy and like not good and definitely don't recommend. However, I do like Q in this episode. And I think he was the best part of this episode. Every time Q popped up, he was just making these hilarious one-liners. And you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't even. Like, he was really, really funny. But the episode as a whole is like, don't watch. Not recommended. But this is a great episode of Q for those two reasons. For one, that we get to see Q kind of let Picard rewrite his past. And then two, that Q was like so funny in this episode. But other than that, it's not really worth it. All right, I'm going to check the chats and then we are going to go to the next episode on the list. By the way, if you have a favorite Q episode I haven't mentioned yet, let me know in the comments. Nadia says, ugh, Tapestry. Not a fan, y'all. Agreed. PS2 Chipper says, I respected this episode. It shows that our experiences, for better or worse, shape our lives. I totally agree. I think one of the things, the episode itself is kind of boring, but also there's like a scene where Picard is making out with a young cadet who was his buddy back in the day. So it was like the Three Musketeers, him, this girl, and this guy. And he and the guy were just like troublemakers and the girl was whatever. And so apparently he had a crush on this girl back when he was also 21 or 19 or whatever, but he never made a move on her because of friendship. He wanted the friendship to last. And this was their last time together on a starbase before they all got their first assignments to go on different ships and to kind of like spread out and they wouldn't see each other again for who knows how long. So when Picard goes back, he's like, one of the things he regrets is not hooking up with her. So he hooks up with her, but he hooks up with her not in like a young Picard body, but in his like super grown man body, hooking up with this like barely legal adult. And that for me, like just makes the entire episode unwatchable because it just grosses me out. It just feels, and not that Picard's a predator at all, but the setup of the episode just feels weird. And I think this episode would have played better for me if they use young Picard, because they showed young Picard in that white room scene in the beginning after he dies and Q is like, you're dead. And I'm, this is why. And he kind of plays back this young guy getting stabbed in the heart. Like that was young Picard. I think I would have liked this episode better if it had all been young Picard. And then when young Picard fast forwarded, it would be old Picard. Like, I think I would have liked that better. It would be less of a hard pill to swallow. But then we wouldn't have gotten that great scene where Q is laying in the bed with Picard, which is a great scene. So I don't know. Win some, you lose some, I guess. Nadia says, we can clone and grow complicated Klingon spines, but we can't do the same to a human heart. Yes, I agree with you. And Tapestry was a couple seasons before Worf's new spine. Plus, we didn't have Dr. Death in there doing experimental designs on people's bodies. Maybe if Dr. Ross or Dr. Russell, or whatever her name was, maybe if she was there, we would have had some other kind of heart. But yeah, that heart was ridiculous. PS2 Chipper says, this is akin to the scene in Star Trek V when Kirk refuses to give up his guilt. Kirk claims that his guilt is what motivates him. Ooh. Andrea says, that's a really great take. I appreciate that perspective. Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, the parallel, exactly. The parallel to Kirk is a super good take. That's interesting. Nadia says, ugh, I watched Star Trek V last week. Boo. I hadn't seen it in ages, and I forgot that it's almost as bad as Star Trek 1. That's funny. But the point you're making, though, PS2 Chipper, the point is what we're going to take from it, which is that our past shapes who we are, and if we made different choices in the past, we'd be different people in the present, most likely. So says quantum entanglement, that if we made different choices, we'd become different people. Let's see. Crazy Normie says, I would hate if my dad had to talk to Q after he passed. Yeah, I would hate to talk to Q after I pass. Like, I just would hate that. And when Q's like, you're dead and I'm God. I don't know if he said I'm God, but obviously that's what he was going for with the big like robe and all of that. That would be a very unhappy moment, which Picard was very unhappy. And he was like, what is this nonsense, Q? You're up to something again. And Q's like, no, you died. I didn't even, this part's me, but the dead part, that's you. Let's see. Yeah, so PS2 Chipper says, why do they need a cloned heart when an artificial heart works? Yeah, so like if you remember in this episode, the heart looks like a toy. I don't know, just like the prop that they use for the heart looks ridiculous. They could have just used a prop for like a real heart from like that you would use for training medical students. They could have just used a heart. They could have just been like, we just made another one. Instead of being like, we made a space heart. They have this big, clunky, weird shaped box. That's his heart that looks like a toy. He doesn't need a space heart. They could have just been like, here's your heart. And it could just look like a real heart. And they could be like, we just gave you a new one. You know what I mean? Like, instead of having a fancy 24th century heart, he could just have like another human heart. That's a real heart. Yes. Nadia says if the doctor from ethics was there, Picard would have died. You're right. Picard would have died. However, she would have come up with a really cool little heart for him. Nadia says cloned is natural. It has to be better than that super technologied artificial heart. We would hope so. PS2 Chipper says, well, I'll remember that for your birthday. Get you a nice natural heart. When Grace says, I'd rather talk to Q when I die than the creepy spider Janeway dad from Voyager. Oh my gosh, yes. From the episode Coda. What was that? Did that creature have a name? Yeah, the one who kept being like, come into my matrix where you will live an eternal life and I'll feast on you forever. Yeah, that guy was super creepy. When Grace, you got a point there. That guy was, can we say worse than Q? Can we say different from Q? That guy was definitely different from Q. Okay. Nadia says, at least you could bargain with Q to bring you back to life, either as yourself or as someone else that you always want to be, or as an amoeba, or as like a worm, an earthworm. Q's got options, but that spider matrix guy, yeah, okay, Q is better. You're right, Q is better. Because there's not a lot of options with that guy. He's just going to like wait you out until you fall into his matrix. Okay, now let's go to the next episode on the list. Season 7, episodes 25 and 26, All Good Things. Picard is transported across 3 timelines by Q to solve the mystery of a temporal anomaly threatening humanity's existence. Piecing together clues from the past, present, and future, Picard discovers that his decisions are key to solving this crisis. Turns out, Q can actually be helpful sometimes. Also, Picard joins the Bridge Crew poker game for the first time. Now, All Good Things is actually not a Q episode. It's a Picard episode, similar to Tapestry, right? It's a Picard episode, and Picard's jumping through timelines, and the jumps are being orchestrated by Q, and Q is again giving Picard a second chance. But in this case, something that Picard has done in the future has erased all of humanity in the past. Unfortunate. So Q's giving him a chance to save humanity, which is like the full circle, right? Because in the beginning, in Encounter at Farpoint, Q was like, humanity, you guys are just some savages and you don't deserve life and blah, blah, blah. Prove to me that you deserve to be here. But when we fast forward to All Good Things, now Q is like, oh man, you guys were going to destroy yourselves. And I kind of don't want that. So I'm going to help you not do that. Now, he could have done it in lots of ways. He could have just, there's like this anomaly in the far, far future that Picard convinces Beverly to fire on, interact with. I don't remember. Whatever that is, it makes the anomaly like get bigger in the past, and then it keeps the primordial ooze from creating life and something. And so Picard's future investigation, Quantum, goes back to the past and then kills everything. So Q could have just like not done that. He could have just like disappeared the anomaly. He could have stopped them from firing into the anomaly. He could have done a lot of things, but he chose to do it this way, which is the Q way. He chose instead to make it this weird game where Picard has to jump through timelines and then kind of figure out what's going on. I don't even know if Q was in the first half of the episode or, part 1 of the episode, or if he only showed up in the second half. And then even then, he didn't tell Picard what was going on. He kind of did a guessing game. He kind of did 20 questions. And so Picard kept being like, what about this? What about that? And of course, Picard's like, Q, you did this. And Q's like, oh, I can't believe that you would say that I would do something like this, which is hilarious that he gets defensive because Q, this is the stuff you do every day. You do stuff like this all day, every day. Why are you surprised that anybody would blame you of this? But he goes, no, this wasn't me at all. Like, this was not me, which is always hard to believe, right? Like, I'm always going to think it's Q. Anyways, he lets Picard play 20 questions until Picard's like, oh, I know, it's me in the future. And I did this thing and I shouldn't do this thing. So now I have to go back and we have to collapse the waveform, something. Yeah, that part, like, whew. However, this is another case where we see Q doing something similar to Tapestry, where he's given Picard a second chance and all of humanity a second chance. And he's intervening when he doesn't have to. And he's intervening in maybe the least helpful way, in the most disorienting way. But of course he would. He can't just like go in a straight line. All Good Things is a super, super interesting episode. And it is an important anchor point in the character of Q. And it seems like it's come full circle and this is the end of his story. Because in the beginning, we see Q in that amazing robe where he's like, I'm your judge. I'm judging all of humanity. And then in the end, in All Good Things, where Picard's like, I thought you said we passed. And Q is like, the trial is never over. And he's like back in his garb and stuff like that. I felt like that was a nice closure. And that was kind of the end of his story. But wait, there's more. We get to see Q again and again. And we're going to go through some more of those episodes today, which I'm really glad for, because we get to see, I don't know, so, like some of my favorite episodes are coming up. Actually, yeah, some of my favorite episodes are coming up. And because Q is Q, he doesn't have to be contained to any one ship or any one storyline because he's in the continuum, which I love, or any one channel, any one show. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we will do the next episode on the list. Okay, let's see. Nadia says, I would have Q bring me back as Picard's wife. Nadia, how long do you think that marriage would last? Because Picard doesn't seem like the joining type. You might be a very lonely wife indeed. But I love that. At least Picard would have a wife. So I'd vote for that. Wingrace says, I would come back as myself. Except I'd wear blue now. You know what I thought you were gonna say? I thought you were gonna say like I'd have purple hair, like Boimler in Lower Decks. I thought you were gonna be like, I'd come back as me, but with purple hair, or like one thing changed. That'd be really funny. Whew. And then Nadia says, once again, you've got the one-liner of the night. Oh, Nadia, the night's not over. And Windgrace has got a million of them. So who knows? Who knows? PS2 Chipper says, I remember they lost the mold for Worf's forehead somewhere around season 4. So now when I see clips, it feels out of place seeing the young Worf. Did they lose the mold or did they just make another one? Because I feel like they couldn't. I feel like you can't lose that. You just make another one. I don't know. That's interesting. That's super interesting. Yes. Okay. All Good Things ends with Picard coming to play poker. I love this. Okay. All Good Things ends with Picard coming to play poker. And the bridge crew always plays poker. We've seen them doing these poker scenes since, I don't know if we saw this in season 1. I don't remember seeing it in season 1, but we've seen it for a long time because the whole point of poker when they first introduced it was that they were teaching Data how to bluff. So that's what the point was teaching him how to like read cues and read emotions and stuff like that. Like that was the big idea behind playing poker. But of course it just became a space for them to chit chat and have slice of life moments and talk about things other than work stuff, which I love. It's their game night. And Picard has never come to these games because he feels like it's something the bridge crew does. And like, I would be intruding, which I think everybody kind of agrees with because when he walks into the game, they're all like, sir, like they almost like stand up. I don't think they do stand up, but they almost stand up. And maybe Riker starts to or something like that. And Picard's like, no, sit, so like the atmosphere has changed when Picard walks in. And so they're like, yes, sir, what do you need? Like clearly he's come in to have some kind of briefing or to tell us to do something. And he's so like shy and it's really sweet where he's like, I just wanted to know if I could play, and they're like, and there's this, and Beverly and Troy look at each other and they're like, oh my word, he's coming to play poker with us, like one of the normals. And so they're like, absolutely. They get up and they move the chairs over and they bring him in, and he's like, oh, okay. And he says something like, I just never thought, like, I just didn't think I was like, could come to these. And then as Andrea mentions, Troy says, you were always welcome, like you were always welcome to come. And I just love that. That was the most just beautiful ending, because it ends with them playing poker and the overhead scene and they're all laughing and talking. And it just was a nice sense of closure again, right? We get the like full circle with Q, we get the full circle with Humanity on Trial. And then we get this like what the show has become, because in the beginning in season 1, there was not a lot of camaraderie, right? It was just a bunch of different characters doing different things, but definitely by the end, they are a crew, they are a team. And it's lovely to see them bonding. It's just like, yeah, so beautiful. Yeah, so PS2 Chipper says Google season 1 Worf and season 7 Worf and see the difference. Yes, Worf in season 1 had a totally different forehead ridge structure and different hairstyle because he had the cute little bob in season 1, which like looks awful on him. And then if you see him in parallels in season 7, he's got different forehead ridges and he's got the long, thick, glorious Kern hair. But I don't know if that was because his cowl was lost or if that was just a design change. Because if you notice, Beverly's hair changes each season. Troy's hair changes each season. Picard doesn't have hair, so that doesn't change each season. But like, Geordi gets a beard at one point. Riker obviously gets a beard. So they just like change up the actual uniforms. And Andrea, you'll probably know this. You'll remember this. I think it was season 2 or 3. They changed uniforms altogether because the original ones were very uncomfortable. So there's just like design changes that happen throughout. But I cannot tell you why. PS2 Chipper, other than, my assumption would be just design changes for aesthetics more than like practical reasons, but I don't know. Time is nonlinear for Q. Yeah, and I think some people would argue time is nonlinear, period. But yeah, it's totally linear for me. Nadia says the marriage would last forever. Her marriage to Picard. So if she died and Q could bring her back as anything, she would want Q to bring her back as Picard's wife. Their marriage would last forever because JLP is an android. I would just turn off the planned obsolescence feature that the younger Sung gave him so that he would live forever and somehow so would you. I love that. Nadia says, after season 1 of TNG Wrapped production, Worf's facial prosthetics were either lost or stolen. What? Okay, so I take that all back, PS2 Chipper. There's a literal quote from the internet, so it must be true. Worst facial prosthetics were either lost or stolen. This presented Michael Westmore, TNG's primary makeup designer, with an opportunity to improve the look. Michael Westmore, by the way, is a genius. The looks that he creates, spectacular, stunning, incredible. Okay, so I stand corrected. Nadia says, wait, time isn't linear for Q. Are you saying that Q is a wormhole alien? Again, mind blown. Q can move through time, similar to how humans move through 3 dimensions, which is very true. Nadia says, I just like the idea of him being a wormhole alien. I'm imagining Q saying in a monotone, Picard, you exist here in that white space in Tapestry. That's hilarious. Okay, so Andrea says it was season 3. Season 3 is when they had the big costume change. That's wild. That's wild. Okay, Andrea says, yes, time is nonlinear for Q. He makes comments about it a few times. Love that detail. He does often talk about that, like, you humans are so linear, you so limited or whatever. Okay, let's look at the next episode on the list. Season 1, Episode 7, Q-less. The adventurous archaeologist Vosh shows up on Deep Space Nine with Q following close behind her heels. She teams up with Quark to sell valuable Gamma Quadrant artifacts while the station faces a mysterious, life-threatening energy drain. And someone finally punches Q in the face. Okay, if for no other reason, this has to be on the list because someone punches Q in the face. Like, if for no other reason, it is such a glorious moment when Cisco just knocks him out. So when I just recently watched this episode because, as you may or may not know, I'm not totally up on my DS9 game. So I have a whole strategy to watch all of DS9 and a couple other shows, so that way I know what people are talking about. Anyways, when I was watching this episode, Vosh suddenly comes on board DS9. So turns out that whole thing we saw in Qpid, where Vosh and Q go off to explore the stars or whatever, somehow at some point they end up in the Gamma Quadrant, which is on the other side of the wormhole where Deep Space Nine is stationed. So they end up, Vosh ends up in the Gamma Quadrant with absolutely no way to get back to the Alpha Quadrant because she went there using Q magic. She doesn't know about the wormhole, and she doesn't have, how many years would it take to get from the Gamma Quadrant to the Alpha Quadrant without a wormhole? I don't know. But I'm feeling like it's some Voyager level stuff. She doesn't have some ship she's going to take 70 years to get back home through. So they are exploring in the Gamma Quadrant, and Vosh leaves Q because she just cannot put up with his shenanigans anymore. But somehow Dax finds her and a bunch of other people on the Gamma Quadrant. I don't remember this part, like how that happened. But in any case, she comes back through the wormhole and comes back to Deep Space Nine. So, of course, Cisco is like, wait, what? There's a human from the Gamma Quadrant? Like, how did she get there? And, of course, she comes back and she's like, I have so much, because she's an archaeologist. Well, she's more like a Tomb Raider, but let's call her an archaeologist. And so she has all this, like, knowledge and stuff like that she's bringing about the Gamma Quadrant. And she's like, oh, I can finally be reaccepted in my archaeological circles who have all, like, banned me because of me stealing artifacts and stuff. They're all going to welcome me back with open arms because I am the foremost expert now on the Gamma Quadrant because I've been there for 3 years, just like tooling around and learning stuff and stealing artifacts. So Cisco is like, but I need to know how you got there. And Vosh is just like, I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it. Which to me is like, no, you're going to talk about it. You're going to talk about it. You're going to get off my station because it's just so sus, you know, like, I don't know. Maybe that's pushing the boundaries of his authority, but she just seemed really suspicious and very like secretive. Well, anyways, she comes onto the ship, and the first person to meet her is O'Brien, who's the only person who recognizes her, obviously, because why would anybody else know who Vosh is? And O'Brien's like, Vosh? And she's like, do I know you? And he's like, yeah, I'm like that guy. I was doing the transporter stuff on the Enterprise. And she's like, right. Hey, she doesn't know who this man is, but he knows who she is. And he knows that Picard was into her, and he knows that she left the ship with Q. So now he's like, I think this is like, I don't know. At this point, he doesn't really have like a hypothesis. But a few minutes later, he sees Q in Quark's bar, and he sees him like walk. And Q's like looks like a Bajoran, but it's Q. And O'Brien sees him, and he's like, bloody hell, or whatever. And he like goes and tells Cisco, and he's like, all right, here's the deal with Vosh. Here's the deal with Q. Q's on the ship, and of course, there's some shenanigans going on the ship. So Cisco is like, Q, you're doing it. You need to stop. Very similar to All Good Things. Like, Q, stop doing what you're doing. And Q's like, this isn't me. None of this is me. And they're like, the ship's going to be destroyed in like 8 minutes if we don't figure out the source of this. The source was one of Vosh's artifacts. But Q's like, I really didn't do anything. And that boxing scene, that's when he realized there's so much hostility coming from Cisco. And he's like, all right, let's just get it over with. This is how two men, get over their issues. If they're humans, they fight. And so he makes this fake boxing thing from like, I don't even know what time period that was when people box like that, but he does that. And he's like, come on, come on. And he actually punches Cisco a few times in the face. And Cisco's just like, what are you doing? This is stupid. And then he's like, come on, hit me, you'll feel better. And then Cisco just like totally uppercuts him and it's great. And then Q's sitting on the floor and he's shocked. He is shocked. And he looks up and he goes, Picard never hit me. And Cisco says, I'm not Picard. And it's glorious. It's a glorious moment. You're just like, yes, Cisco is not Picard. And he's not putting up with these shenanigans. But Q actually didn't do anything wrong. And the only reason he was here is because his obsession with Picard has transferred into an obsession with Vosh. And so he's trying to convince Vosh to come back with him and to be with him again. And Vosh is like, I'm sick of you and your nonsense. Leave me alone. And he's like, but think of what we could do. We could do this. We could do that. We could go all these amazing places. So Vosh ends up just being like, I don't want anything to do with you, Q. But she does partner up with Quark to go and explore other unexplored regions to find more valuable artifacts. So it's super interesting. It's the only time, as far as I know, it's the only time we see Q on Deep Space Nine. And it's perfect because it gives us closure on whatever happened after Qpid, which we never get with Star Trek. We almost never get a where are they now. So I love the fact that we got that for Vosh. And as far as I know, this is Vosh's last appearance in Trek, as far as I know, because she goes off and does her criminal tomb raiding thing, / archaeological exploration thing. If you know differently, let me know in the comments. But with that being said, I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to go to the next episode on the list. Nadia says, fun tidbit. Vosh is French for cow. Just saying. Is that how she spells it though? I think it's V-A-S-H, isn't it? Andrea says that makes it even better. She's not a cow though. She's just like, I don't think she's a bad person. I don't think she's a moral person, but like when I saw at the end of Qpid, I was like, Vosh and Q deserve each other. And then when I saw them in Deep Space Nine, I was like, yep, that tracks. That Vosh and Q deserve each other until they realize that their similarities are just clashing and they can't stand each other. That whole circle seemed appropriate. Okay, let's hit the next episode on the list. Season 2, Episode 18, Death Wish. A Q named Quinn requests asylum aboard Voyager so he can end his immortal existence, which he finds unbearable. Janeway holds a hearing to determine whether Quinn should have the right to die, ultimately ruling in his favor. Quinn's death, however, sparks significant unrest in the Q continuum, challenging their views on immortality. This is my all-time favorite Q episode. And that's a little bit of a cheat putting it on this list because the reason why I love it is because of Quinn, which is that other Q in this episode. But obviously Q is in it because it's about the Q continuum. But the character of Quinn is so lovely. He's kind of the anti-Q. He's really charming. He's really personable. He sort of invades people's space, but kind of accidentally because he doesn't know his own strength and powers and stuff like that. So basically when they find this comet, the Voyager crew sees this comet going through space. And I think they scan it or something. And they're like, there's life signs in it or something like that. And then they beam it aboard and then it's a Q. And he shows up and he's like, hi, I'm Q. And so Janeway and crew have never actually seen Q from TNG. They don't know what he looks like. So they assume this is Q. And so they start freaking out. And B'Elanna's like, Captain, Q is here. And Janeway's like, oh, here we go. This is the last thing we need. Matter of fact, I'm glad you're here. Can you take us home? You know what I mean? It's like the last thing we need is Q coming in here doing a bunch of shenanigans. And so Q is like, thank you so much. Quinn, he ends up going by Quinn so we can distinguish the two. Quinn is like, thank you so much for letting me out. I'm going to go meet the captain myself. And he snaps and then they end up in the kitchen. And he's like, can I offer you some food? And he snaps and food's covered on the table and stuff. And he's shaking her hand. And I mean, he's just so grateful. But she's thinking this is Q the whole time, right? So she's like, what do you want, Q? What are you doing here? And he's like, all I want to do is die. And she's like, what kind of game is this? And then Q shows up and is like, who let you out of your prison? And all this stuff. And anyways, you come to find out that the Q continuum has banished Quinn to this icy comet for all eternity to keep him from self-harm because he does not want to be a Q anymore and he does not want to be immortal anymore. And for the Q, being immortal is just a thing you are. You can't choose not to. Now, of course, you can choose not to, but they're like, they don't want him to make that choice. They're like, no, we all live forever. That's the deal. So you have to stay alive. And Quinn is like, so anyways, they end up doing this court trial between Q being the prosecutor, Tuvok is the defense attorney, and Quinn is on trial for whether or not Quinn should be allowed to take his own life. And Janeway is the judge. But also the Q continuum are also there. So it's a little confusing. But anyways, point is, Quinn asked for asylum. So of course, Janeway, just like when Q asked Picard, Janeway's like, well, yeah, I'm going to grant you asylum. But this is an important issue. We need to figure out, what are the merits of this? At one point, Q actually takes everybody to the Q continuum. And it just looks like this dusty road in the middle of nowhere, America, which is so interesting because later on we see the continuum again and it looks totally different. And then Q says, oh yeah, we just make it look like whatever we want for you because it looks nothing like this to us. But anyways, so they come to this road and Quinn is just saying like, this is why I don't want to do this anymore. And he's like, I've done everything there is to do. I've seen everything there is to see. I've experienced everything there is to experience. The only thing I have never experienced is death. And Janeway's like, yeah, that doesn't seem like you're living a terrible life though, because that was the point he was making is my life is so terrible. It's so miserable. It's so painful, all these things that I want the chance to be mortal and, experience that. And she's just like, this doesn't seem so bad. And Q, of course, they're like, yep, it's not that bad. Yep, he's tripping and all this stuff. So anyways, in the end, Janeway tries to convince him to become a member of the Voyager crew. She's like, if you want to explore things you've never explored, become human and stay with us and just experience the Delta Quadrant with us, experience being a scientist, experience science, wonders and just alien species you've never met, or maybe you have because you're a Q, I don't know, but you've never met them as a human. You've never done things that could put your life in danger. You've never done things without your powers. This could open up a whole new reality for you. And Quinn was like, okay, because Janeway said, yes, like I grant you this immortality. And the Q continuum, they were all like on board with it. So Quinn becomes mortal, and Janeway thinks that she has convinced him to stay mortal, to stay human and to become a member of the crew and kind of explore the Delta Quadrant with him and live his natural life to its own natural ending. But like 2 minutes after he becomes mortal, he's in sickbay because he's poisoned himself. And so she comes over and she's like, but we talked and we had this whole conversation about your life and your future and all this stuff. And he was like, you know what? It was very tempting. And at first I did want to do that, but honestly, this is what I want. Like these are my wishes and thank you for honoring them. And of course, Janeway's all conflicted and upset and there's nothing anyone can do and the doctor can't save him and all this stuff. It is really heartbreaking. I always cry at the end of this episode, but it's a really moving and deep episode. And I think Q is very Q in it because he is being playful and precocious and all of that, but with a really serious topic. So he's not scary, he's not menacing, he's not terrifying, he's not any of that, but it's this really serious, heavy topic that he kind of brings this layer of lightness to. It's kind of like whipped cream on a custard. It's like something dense and heavy, and Q brings like just this lightness to it that really balances it out, and it helps you experience this emotionally sensitive topic in a way that's fantastical, so you can process it. Favorite episode of all time when it comes to Q. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we're going to hit the next episode on the list. Nadia says, Picard as a Frenchman should never have gone after a woman named Cow, which is Vosh, which is hilarious. Yeah, PS2 Chipper says, it's like giving up your American citizenship when Quinn wants to become human. Yeah, exactly. It's like being like, I was born and raised in America. I've lived here my whole life. Let's say I'm like 63 years old. I've just lived my whole life here. And now I'm like, I will no longer be that. I will be completely disassociated from that and be something else and have my allegiance to some other country. And it's like such a shift. But Quinn was very, very committed. He knew what he wanted and there was no changing his mind, which is why they banished him to a comet forever and ever because they knew they couldn't change his mind. Oh yes. And when Grace says # surprise Riker. So in this court scene, it's really cool. It's kind of like a Forrest Gump moment in the court scene where Q is prosecuting Quinn and trying to prove why Quinn's life matters. Q starts bringing in all these people from history, which I don't even remember who they are, but like real life famous people. He brings them all from history because he can like mess with time like that. And he puts them on the stand and he has them explain how Quinn changed their lives, changed the course of humanity, changed the course of their careers. You know, it's people like Einstein and whatever. Like he's bringing all these people up and he's like, how did Quinn change your life? How did Quinn change your life? And then at one point he brings in Riker because Quinn did something to change his life. And Riker's just like, what am I doing? Where am I at? I was just on the bridge in the Enterprise, you know? And Q's like, we brought you here for this case or whatever. And he's like, oh, it's Q, of course. You know, but even Riker was part of this long list of people who've been positively affected by the life of Quinn, which was also kind of beautiful. Like, I like that this is your life. And this was Q just saying, like, your life matters, your existence matters. And that's why it needs to continue because it will continue to matter. Andrea says, Q is totally whipped cream on custard. Leave me to make a food reference that is exclusively a dessert. Yeah. So Nadia says, a lot of Americans renounce their citizenship when they move abroad for tax purposes. The U.S. is one of the few countries that taxes its citizens regardless of their place of residence. Yeah, and you know what else it does? Because I used to work for a company in Canada. It also taxes me for the money I'm making for Canada because I'm living in the United States while I'm making that money for Canada. Yeah, U.S. does not play around with their taxes. Okay, let's hit the next episode on the list. Season 3, Episode 11, The Q and the Gray. Q asks for Janeway's help to end a civil war within the Q continuum caused by another Q named Quinn choosing to die. Q's solution is to mate with Janeway to create a new unifying life form. But his wife has something to say about that plan. Ultimately, the two Q mate instead and end the war. So this episode is it's great. It's great to see Lady Q, and Lady Q is played by the actress who played Kalar and who played Dr. Solar in TNG. And she shows up and she's super jealous of Janeway because Q shows up and he's like, okay, because Quinn died in that past episode, that actually sparked a civil war in the Q continuum. Because there's people going like, we should have the right to be mortal. And there's people being like, no, that was just one exception to the rule. We all need to be immortal. And for whatever reason, that caused them to all fight. And their fighting is bleeding over into all realities. So even in the Delta Quadrant where Voyager is, there's all these like quantum fissures being ripped into space. And it's because the Q continuum is fighting. So Q comes to Janeway and is like, if we created a new life form, that could give all of the continuum something to focus on, to refocus on, and it could give us a new future, right? Because they don't reproduce this way. So he's like, if we create a new life form, then they'll be like, oh, yes, we lost a life, but we got a life. And it's new. Like, how does this work? And it will kind of like distract them from all this crazy fighting that's tearing holes in space time. And it would bring peace. And Janeway is like, no. All the no's in no land. I am not mating with you. And so Q is like, why? Is it because you're hooked up with Chakotay? Like, that's pretty hilarious. But then Lady Q shows up, Q's wife, and she's just like, what is going on? And she's super jealous of Janeway. And she's like, you're my husband or whatever. And everybody's like, what? And then turns out they were mates from the way back, but they haven't seen or talked to each other in hundreds or thousands of years or whatever. So Q is just living like a single man, but is not single. So she comes along, but she's also lost her Q powers. And I don't remember how that happened, but she loses her Q powers. Q takes Janeway to the continuum to like prove to her how bad it is and why they need to mate. So they're in the continuum. And when they go back this time, instead of being some dusty road in the middle of nowhere, America, it's like the some revolutionary time. I don't know where they're supposed to be, if they're supposed to be in England or France, but they've got those like beautiful old timey outfits. Or even if they're supposed to be in America, I have no idea where they're supposed to be, but it's a long time ago. And it's during some kind of other civil war. You know what? I think it is the American Civil War and they're in the South. That's what because I think he says something like that, like you're a beautiful Southern belle, or something like that. So I think it's actually an American South. Anyways, they're all fighting and the Q are fighting with like muskets or whatever, but Q actually gets shot at one point and starts bleeding. Like whatever weapons they're using actually work to harm other Q, which is terrifying. And so Lady Q is on Voyager and she lost her powers for whatever reason. And they're trying to fly into one of these rifts in order to like get into the continuum to get the captain back and something Q. And so she's trying to help them do this, but she's just as like awful as Q. She's just like mean and snippy, and she's like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you just fold space-time in half and just do it that way? Why are you using these clunky engines? Which is like hilarious. All of this is comedic. And then at the very end, Lady Q and Q decide to mate, as you saw in that clip, by touching fingers, and that's all there was to it. And Janeway was like, wait, that's it? And Q was like, you had your chance. Don't complain to me now, or whatever, because Janeway's kind of like, oh, I thought it was a lot more, especially since if you watch the beginning of this episode, he redoes her bed and puts like flowers on it and silk sheets and all of this. So it seems like it's going to be more than just touching fingers in the beginning. But in any case, they make a new baby Q, and that new baby Q ends the war. So yay for that. This is a fun episode. It's kind of on par with Qpid, I would say. It's kind of fun. It's kind of lighthearted. There's a lot of jokes. But of course, the subject matter, because it's Civil War, is a little bit darker than Robin Hood. But this kind of like I would say it's equivalent, like a fun kind of popcorn episode. Okay, I'm going to check the chat, and then we're going to hit the last episode on the list. Yes, Randall says, what a cute Q baby. I love that too. At the end, Q just like bouncing this little baby on his lap. So it's like they touched fingers. Then Q does whatever his Q thing is. And they all end up back on the Enterprise. They all end up back on Voyager. And when Janeway walks into her ready room, Q's there with the baby. So it's been like 10 minutes, but the baby's already like 6 months old, which I just love that, right? Because of course it is, because it's a Q. So of course it's already that much older. And it was a very cute little baby and cute little scene. Andrea says, I see what you did there. What a cute baby. I get it. Yes, Wingrace says the line that Lady Q says the moment she walks in, because, okay, so when Janeway left Earth, she was engaged to this guy named Mark, and Mark had just given her a puppy as a gift, and she loves this puppy, but now she's like stranded in the Delta Quadrant, doesn't know she'll ever see Mark again. It's like a whole thing. So in one of the scenes where Q is still trying to woo Janeway, he gives her a puppy that's the same breed as the dog that Mark gave her to try to win her over, because he knows what she's into. And so he gives her this puppy, and she's like, oh my gosh, like, and she's totally melting about how cute this puppy is. And then Lady Q shows up and says this line right here where she goes, what are you doing with that dog? And they both look up, and she goes, and I'm not talking about the puppy. And Q is like, what? And Jamie's like, excuse me? So freaking rude. PS2 Chipper says, Q's mating. That is how new universes are born. I guess. I couldn't tell you. Okay, let's hit the last episode on the list, and then I have a few honorable mentions. Season 7, Episode 19, Q2. Q entrusts Janeway with mentoring his unruly teenage son, Q Jr., whose reckless behavior puts the continuum at odds. Jr. befriends Icheb, and they get into all kinds of shenanigans, including one that leaves Icheb unconscious in sickbay. Jr. takes responsibility for his actions and even tries to sacrifice himself, which leads Q to restore his powers and Icheb's health. This episode I love. So as far as the 3 episodes of Q, the 3 Q episodes in Voyager, my favorite one is the Death Wish episode. But this is my second favorite Q2. And I did not know this until I was preparing for this very conversation, that Q Jr. in real life is John Delancey's actual son, which I just think is funny, because when I was looking at, like, when I was pulling together these clips, I was like, man, they really picked a good actor, because this kid looks a lot like John Delancey. Like, they found the perfect, like, match. And then when I was, doing research about this episode, it was like, oh, and Q Jr. was played by his actual son. How fun is that? It's kind of like Inner Light, how Picard's son was playing his son in the movie. I love that. I love that little touch. Q Jr. is like as bad as Q, but add in teenage hormones. He's just an awful little scamp. He's terrible. When he comes on board, Q is just like, so at first having this baby ended the war, yay. But then he became a teenager, boo. And he's like, we're kind of over this kid. And the Continuum has said, figure it out, Q. Like, we cannot handle what Junior is doing because he has Q-like powers. He's still a Q. And so he's going around just causing even more destruction than Q himself would normally cause. And so the Continuum is like, we can't handle this. You need to do something about it. So originally he drops Q Junior off for Janeway to like discipline him, teach him some manners or whatever. And then he wreaks all kinds of havoc on the ship, including at one point, Neelix comes to talk to him and is just like, hey, maybe you could use your powers for good instead of evil. And so Junior looks at him and is just like, you talk too much, and disappears his mouth. So now the doctor's like, well, I'll have to do surgery, and also his vocal cords have been cut, like all these crazy things that he was doing. So Q comes back on board and is just like, you're not learning the lesson you need to learn. So we're going to remove your powers. So Q Jr. loses all of his powers and becomes human. And so now he's like, what do I do? Because he's never experienced not having powers. And also he's like this, like just awful teenager. So he's still trying to cause trouble, but it's a lot harder without your Q powers. Icheb, on the other hand, is Mr. Goody Goody. Okay, Icheb like does not break the rules. He doesn't stay up late. He dots all his I's and crosses all his T's. You know what I mean? So this combination is pretty funny and pretty sweet to watch. Because Icheb's like, hey, let's have fun. I think he says, would you like to engage in recreational activities together? And Junior is just like, why? I don't want to, I have all this stuff to do, because Janeway puts him on this whole regimen of like, gives him a curriculum and basically treats him like a Starfleet cadet and gives him like homework and assignments and tries to teach him discipline. But at some point, which he does take seriously. And at some point he writes this paper and he's like going through the motions, and he does what he thinks is a really good job. And he presents the paper to Janeway, and Janeway's like, wow, Junior, like, I'm really impressed by that. But Q, his dad, happens to be sitting in the room or just pops up or whatever. And he's like, that was horrible. That was terrible. That wasn't even good. And all this other stuff. So Junior just like gives up on everything. He just gives up on trying, and he steals a shuttle. He tricks Icheb. They steal a shuttle, and he goes and messes with some people. Like, he's just like, forget it. I tried to be good. It didn't work, which again is like so classic teenager / preteen, because I have a lot of experience with high schoolers and middle schoolers. And I'm like, yep, sometimes that negative reinforcement, just people are like, I quit. So anyways, he ends up getting in a jam that hurts Icheb, and Icheb is about to die. And so Junior goes to sacrifice himself in hopes of saving Icheb's life. And then it turns out that the person who attacked Icheb and Junior was actually Q in disguise. So Q is like, okay, like, you've passed my test or whatever. And Janeway and Junior are like, why did you do this? And Q is like, I knew that the things you were having him do to Janeway, I knew that the things you were having him do would not be enough to impress the Continuum. We needed to like ratchet this up. So I had to show that he can have compassion, that he can be selfless, that he can care about others. I had to prove that so the Continuum wouldn't destroy him, because they were like wanting to turn him into an amoeba for the rest of his life or whatever. So he talks to the Q Continuum, or the Q Continuum shows up here, and they kind of like have this conversation, and they decide that Q Jr. will not be turned into an amoeba or a parasite or whatever kind of thing they were going to turn him into. But they decide to give him a far worse punishment, remaining human. So they do not return his powers. They leave him as a human, but they don't turn him into a bug either, or some kind of parasite or some kind of microscopic organism. But then Q leaves to go and have a conversation with them. And when he comes back, he's like, I've talked to them. You have your powers back. And Q Jr. is like so grateful. And he like, that scene right there where he blows on the roses, the entire quarter is filled with roses. And he's like, thank you so much, Auntie Kathy, to Janeway and all that stuff. And it's really sweet. And it does seem like he's turned over a new leaf. And then we find out after he like disappears somewhere that the caveat to the Continuum giving Junior back his powers is that Q has to be with Junior for like the next 1,000 years or whatever, next 100 years, to like watch him and monitor him and help him and make sure he doesn't go astray. So basically they force Q to be a father, which I love. I love that for Q. There's another pivotal change like in his life, in his direction, that now he's got, who knows what happened to Lady Q and all of this, but at least for Q, this is his chance to learn some discipline and learn some humility and learn some empathy and all those things that he's always talking about humans are weak for. This is his chance to learn those things. And I love that. And I love this episode. Okay. Let's, I think that was the last episode on the list. Yes. So here are my honorable mentions. These honorable mentions are from Picard. So if you've not finished watching Picard yet, then you maybe want to hop off this video and go watch the next video. But if you have watched Picard, the first honorable mention comes from season 2, episode 2, Penance. And in this episode, um, like it's so hard for me to say because Picard just okay. So this is season 2 Picard where they go to like this alternate timeline where the Federation is evil and they hunt all the other species in the galaxy and they're like fascists and they like put heads on a spike or whatever. And Picard's house just has a bunch of skulls all over the place because he's like the war general or whatever. Turns out all of that is Q's doing yet again. So kind of like Tapestry, kind of like All Good Things, Q takes Picard to this alternate timeline where humanity has gone down a very different road. And again, Picard is like, what is this nonsense, Q? What are you doing? And all these other kinds of things. And again, just like in Tapestry, just like in All Good Things, just like in Q List in Deep Space Nine, Q is like, this was not my doing. This was your doing. This is what humanity has done. And I'm giving you a second chance, Picard, to like right the wrongs of humanity, but not the wrongs of Picard himself, the wrongs of all of humanity. And the way they're going to right the wrongs is him and his crew of like 3 other people or 4 other people are supposed to navigate this world and somehow make it turn out better. It's big question marks. Like how is this supposed to work? Anyways, but we do see Q again. And one thing he does is he goes, oh, Picard, you've aged. Let me match you or whatever. And he snaps. And now he's like an older version of Q who looks gorgeous. Like it just was a beautifully done scene, by the way. And all of Picard is gorgeous. So even if the storylines, the sets and everything, the costumes, just perfection. So here we see kind of like a tried and true Q trope, right? That Q comes back, gives a second chance, does an alternate timeline, sends Picard somewhere. This time he sends Picard and a few friends. But the execution was whatever. That's a conversation for another day. I don't love this episode. This is why I did not make the top 10 list, because when Q comes back here, he's a little bit of the old Q, right? Because he's like, hello, Picard. But he's also like just mean. He's just mean. He's mean and powerful. And at one point he like smacks the crap out of Picard and Picard starts bleeding. And he's like, don't you talk back to me or whatever. And you're like, wait, we were so ecstatic when Cisco punched out Q because that was like, what? But now we just have Q just backhanding Picard because he talked back. That just doesn't fit. However, it does fit the vibe, like the tone of all of Picard is kind of like, well, maybe not season 3 because season 3 was more like for the fans, but seasons 1 and 2 was post-apocalyptic. It was very dark. And so having Q be this menacing force does fit that vibe. But like seeing him just smack the crap out of Picard and Picard starts bleeding, that just was weird. I cannot put that in my favorite Q moment because I don't like that Q is doing that or is acting that way. And why would he need to? He's like all powerful. He could just snap and make Picard like Ant-Man size or like all kinds of things. There's just no reason for him to hit somebody like that. To like, it just, I don't know. I don't love it. And then the next episode in the honorable mention also comes from Picard. This is the end of season 2. This is season 2, episode 10, called Farewell. And this is the episode where Q says goodbye. So this is really like a full circle moment for Q, for reals, for reals. Not like we thought we had in All Good Things. This is like for real, the full circle moment where we find out after all this time travel, all this timey-wimey stuff, Q has them all at Chateau Picard, and he's talking to Picard about like why he had to go through this and all of this stuff. And Picard's like, I know, I understand. And Q's like, what? And he's like, you're dying, and this was your last gift to us. This is why Picard just, it bugs me. Because we just talked about how Q are immortal, how they can't die, how the only one who could die was Q. And that's only because they granted him mortality so that he had the option to die eventually, or when he chose to. But Q don't die. And so in this episode, they're just like, oh, Q's dying. So that's why he gave humanity this last chance. Q can't die. Nope, not unless he becomes mortal. And also, why is he giving humanity a last chance by taking them out of this timeline where everything was a-okay and sticking them into a timeline where everything is horrible to force them to come back to their original timeline? Who's he helping? Who's being helped? No one's being helped. The whole time, Picard and crew are trying not to die because because they don't know how to act like their old, like fascist selves. They don't know how to act like the evil Starfleet, and they're just trying to not get caught, and they're trying to find each other, and they're trying to like escape and get back to their reality, to their own timeline. So like this does fit the Q family crest of more harm than good, but it's just kind of dumb. It's pointless. I don't get it. I don't get it. And then Q is like, but there is a sweet moment where Picard and Q hug, as the frenemies that they are, which I guess that is sweet. And then he's like, with his last dying energy, he's going to send them back to their reality, which, by the way, he pulled them out of in the first place. So he's like, I'm going to send you back to your reality, and it's going to take everything that I have in me, my last little drop, to send you back to your reality. And he does that. He sends them back. And at one point in the alternate reality, 7 of 9 dies, but then she gets assimilated so that she doesn't die. But then Q sends her back, like, not dead or assimilated. So that's good. And then somehow Girardi, who becomes the Borg Queen, who decides to not assimilate people against their will, but instead assimilate people who are dying and give them the choice, like, hey, die or be assimilated. Somehow she is now in the Prime line again. This is, yeah, I don't get it. But that was Q's contribution. He sent them back, and that was like his last moment, and then he died. So I don't know. That's why these 2 episodes can't go on my like best Q episodes list. However, you can't not talk about them because it's literally how his story ends. And it's so important in the growth and eventual death of this character. Okay, I'm going to check the chat one last time, and then we'll be good to go. Okay. Andrea says Susie Plaxon, or Lady Q, should have shown up with young Q the way she showed up with little Alexander. This is hilarious. Susie Plaxton should have showed up with young Q the way she showed up with little Alexander on a transporter pad with 0 notice. That's hilarious. So since Susie Plaxton played Kalar back in TNG in not the episode Emissary, that's the episode where like they hook up, but in whatever the episode is when she comes back, she just shows up with Alexander and is just like, surprise, Worf, huh? And so that would be hilarious if she showed up with Q and was just like, surprise, Q Jr., huh? It would be harder in this scene because they planned it, but that'd be freaking hilarious. When Grace says, yeah, that was an odd moment. It was odd when Q just smacked the crap out of Picard in Picard. It was just like, it was just weird. Yeah. So when Grace says, yeah, that was an odd moment. And before you ask which moment, just all of them. Just all of them. Yes. 100%. That's the line for the night for me. That sums it up so perfectly. PS2 Chipper says that one scene where the deborged 7 of 9 was stealing a car and running from the police for no reason was the jump the shark scene for me. Yeah, there was a car chase. There's just, yeah. There was just so many things going on. I wish the show just did not have Picard. Granted, it was called Picard, and the only reason anybody watched it was because they were pulling on the fandom of TNG. However, having watched it, I kind of wish they would have just done a whole different show, like a whole new, kind of like Strange New Worlds. Just do a spin-off with characters we've never seen before, except for in Strange New Worlds, we have a lot of the characters from TOS, and we have Spock and stuff like that. So maybe not Strange New Worlds, maybe Discovery. But like, just do something different, because trying to like, it's like a puzzle that just doesn't fit. Trying to fit the stuff from Picard in with TNG, it's just like they don't play well together. Anyways, yeah, the car chase scene. There's so much action in season 2, which is fun and silly and ridiculous and whatever. There was a heist episode where they have to go and it's so much going on. Anyways, again, like I said, conversation for another day. I want to thank you so much for those of you joining me live. For those of you who are joining me on the replay and have made it to the end, congratulations. You've made it here. Welcome. Glad to have you here. If you have not yet done so, be sure to subscribe so you can see all the videos that are coming up, including some ones that I'm super excited about that I'm working on right now. And be sure to like this. Hit the like button if you have enjoyed today, because I have enjoyed today. And I will see you all next time. Okay, wait, before I say that, hold on. I want to put this up on the screen. It was only Picard season 3. The world would be a better place. Yeah, but the only reason they made Picard season 3 was, in my opinion, I don't have any proof of this, is because people were so angry with Picard season 2. That's what I think. Yeah. Randall says, gods are not supposed to die. So how can Q die? Especially when we had the whole episode in Death Wish about how Q cannot die. And then the one death of Quinn caused an entire civil war because Q cannot die. And then in season 2, Q's like, oh yeah, I'm dying. Come on, dude. Like, come on. Thanks so much, PS2 Chipper. A Guinan and Q battle. Yeah. Okay. This is gonna, I'm never gonna have a moment where we're talking about Picard longer than this moment. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.